If anything is going to trip you up in the garden this summer, it's garden gap. It's happened to the best of us, and I can tell you right now, it's happened to me more than once every single year, but it's really easy to avoid it. So when I say garden gap, what I'm talking about is when you planted all your cool season crops way early in the year, and now things are starting to heat up in the garden, and you're harvesting those things, and you're left with these huge gaping gaps in your garden where nothing is growing. Garden gaps waste space, and they also create an environment that invites weeds because there's just nothing in the way to stop them from growing. We can fix this really easily with succession planting. Now, I feel like succession planting is up there with companion planting in that it confuses the heck out of people, and people get really intimidated by it because it can be made very, very complicated. I'm planning to demystify this for you today and make it really, really simple and accessible so that you can apply this in your own garden immediately. And we're not going to use any fancy, crazy charts or spreadsheets to do it. Because once you get like the guidelines and the fundamentals behind it, you really can just kind of go off your own gardener's gut and intuition. Succession planting is going to be important no matter how big your garden space is, but if you are gardening in a much smaller space, it's going to become absolutely essential to kind of maximizing the space that you do have so that you're not leaving any empty spots in your garden that are going unused throughout the season. So we're maximizing the harvest, we're getting a wider variety, and we're also potentially even interrupting the spread of diseases and pests because the garden is kind of just ever changing. And you will see that succession planting ties in a lot to companion planting because the things that you can kind of plant next to each other are good companion plants to begin with. I will be the first to admit I did a terrible job of this last year, and I think that the reason I did such a bad job of it, even though I'm totally aware of the concept behind it, is I got really in my head about the charts and the spreadsheets and the planting schedules and making sure that I was doing things the right way. And even with the amount of experience that I have in the garden, I found that intimidating and I found it not very fun. And I've been talking a lot about this and how I'm trying to make the garden more fun for me this year by being more spontaneous and impulsive in the way that I'm planting things. That's how we ended up with our amazing tea garden. That's one of my favorite things I've ever planted. We're talking about implementing succession sowing. I want you to kind of throw out the window this idea that there's one right way to do it and think of it more as an opportunity to be experimenting in the garden, because that's what our gardens should be for. You're not a market gardener, you're not producing to sustain your entire family off of one lot of food that you're growing. We're here to experiment and enjoy and get out in nature. And so there's totally room to make mistakes in succession sowing, and that's fine, and we can learn from those. But there are some fundamentals that once you get them down will make it a little bit easier, so you're making less of those mistakes right off the bat. When we're talking about accessibility in gardening and making gardening accessible to everyone, it's really important that we're talking about kind of eliminating these expectations that everything be done perfectly and done right and by a rule book. And that's why I'm always encouraging you to learn just the basic fundamentals and like what a garden should feel, look, and smell like. Like the sensory inputs of it will tell you so much. We talk about this in watering your garden and how people are always like, well, how often should I water? And of course, this is very climate dependent, but there's also another really easy way to figure it out, and that's by just sticking your finger in the soil and seeing if it's damp. So these sensory inputs are kind of letting us come back into ourselves and giving us confidence in trusting that we know what our gardens need based on the information that we're receiving. Which means that when we're talking about succession planting, we need to be talking first and foremost about how these plants are interacting with each other and the plants that you're taking out and the plants that you're putting in. So the basic premise is that we're going to take stock probably on a weekly basis. I go out in my garden every morning and just do a quick 5-10 minute walk around and just assess where things are at. So I can walk around and say, you know what, let's just do it right now. I'll go outside with you and we'll do my walk around and I'll show you exactly what I mean. A bright, beautiful day out here. All right, so I usually come out first thing, open up the greenhouse so that it gets fresh air and doesn't get too hot too quickly. And then coming into these beds, a lot of people when they talk about succession planting, they're thinking in rows and blocks. And I'm more of a sprinkling chaos kind of person at this point. So you're gonna see a little bit of that. These beds are a really great example. So I have these lettuces that I put in first thing. This was my very first succession because I wanted some green in here. I wanted something that was cool loving when I knew that these beds wouldn't be looking real full for a while since I'm putting tomatoes and leeks in them, and those take a while to actually bush up and develop. So the lettuce was the the first thing that went in, then the leeks, then the tomatoes. But I know that lettuce is going to be coming out soon. Obviously, it's getting really huge. I actually counted. I have something like 17 heads of lettuce that are ready to pick right now, and I have no idea what to do with them. So the neighbors are going to be getting a lot unless you guys can give me some suggestions in the comments. But since I know these are coming out soon, what I've done is popped in my basil plants. So these basil plants and the leeks are going to stay in alongside the tomatoes for the rest of the summer, but the lettuce is going to come out, and it's coming out just in time for everything else that just went in after it to fill in and bush out. Same deal with the marigolds. Marigolds I'll plant one and done in the early spring. The basil I will continue to succession plant. With succession planting basil specifically, you can start it from seed because it does mature pretty fast. What I actually like to do once it gets nice and big and bushy is to propagate it by the stem. So anytime I harvest basil to bring inside to make a meal with, I'll take at least a couple of those stems and stick them in water so that they can root, and I can continuously just keep popping those new rooted stems into the garden. The tea garden is pretty set in stone. Everything in here is gonna go all summer long. This back bed being more like the herb bed and taking a little bit longer to fill in, I did end up just popping some beans in here. I think these are the yellow beans. I'll link them down below. Just to kind of fill in those empty gaps while I was waiting for the stuff that would be here all summer to fill in. So it kind of works both ways. I did the same, more lettuce in this bed. This will come out just in time for these nasturtiums to really start to take off. In the green stalks, I planted my beets and then I put my Swiss chard in on either side of them. So by the time the Swiss chard is really taking off here, I'll be pulling these beets out and the Swiss chard can continue the rest of the summer. So these are obviously the things that I planted early in the season as my first succession before I put in the main summer plantings. But we should probably talk about what you can actually plant now that it's late spring, early summer maybe where you are, and it's time to get in a new round of things after our initial planting. These beds have a really good example of this. I told myself I wasn't going to plant any brassicas in these beds because they just take over, and I feel like brassicas, especially broccolis and cauliflowers in particular, are the worst offenders of garden gap because they get so huge, they create so much shade, and when you do harvest them, they leave an enormous space where they were. But the one good thing about all this foliage is how much shade it does make, and we can use that to our advantage to work with nature and not against it by planting things in between the spaces like carrots that need to stay consistently damp. Because I find if I'm chaos sowing carrots, obviously they need to stay damp in order to germinate. And the best way to do that is to give them some kind of mulch, like our cardboard experiment that we did on that back bed. But if you don't want to have to continuously cover and uncover them, having some kind of leafy foliage is a great kind of lazy hack. I will throw carrot seeds in behind all of this. You can chaos sow carrot seeds all year long. That's what Meg has taught me, and some of them will come up, some of them won't, but it's a nice surprise. Looking at my trellises, I did do snap peas on all of these front beds. Of course, snap peas are very heat sensitive, and so they aren't gonna last more than like probably another month or so. I do already have a first round of cucumbers ready to go here, but I am probably going to do another row of cucumbers just so that by the time these start to slow down, there'll be more growing. So I'll probably do those in 3 to 4 weeks. But this is a really easy way to kind of organically integrate thinking about succession sowing into your everyday just garden walks, like just observing and paying attention to those gaps that are going to be there in 2 weeks or a month can really help you to be thinking ahead so that those things can already be in the ground when it's time to pull the old stuff out. So I'm gonna give you a list of exactly what I recommend as companion plants. But as always, whenever you're watching a YouTube gardening channel, you need to keep in mind your individual climate may be very different than mine. So I'm in zone 6B in Massachusetts, and right now we're just starting to head into warmer weather and we have a very short growing season. So things to keep in mind are definitely what's going to work in your climate, what the days to maturity are for the plant that you're considering. So generally at this point in the season, we're looking for short season crops that will do really well and grow really fast. And most importantly, just thinking about the companion planting element of it. Certain things just don't grow well together and some things really like to grow well together. So the good news is a lot lot of the short season crops that we're throwing in right now for succession planting, they're pretty friendly with everything. Like I'll plant leafy greens with pretty much anything, and the same with like beans, which is another really big one. So in terms of exactly what I recommend that you plant right now, I'm gonna link these down below if you need specific recommendations. This is my favorite seed company that I always grab seeds from as well. Basil is going to be a huge one. You can try all sorts of different varieties. Some other herbs may work better than others. Just keep in mind the days to maturity. Beans are a huge one, and there's so many different types of beans. I will say I'm focusing more on bush beans for this kind of succession planting strategy versus vining pole beans. Again, these are mostly cool season crops, but you can also look for arugula, kale, Swiss chard, radishes, and beets as other options that you could throw in the ground. In terms of how I'm implementing this, let me show you what I do. So I have this little caddy. You can use a cup, it totally doesn't matter, but I just keep this on my table right where I can grab it when I'm heading out into the garden. And I'll keep plant tags in this and like a Sharpie and little bits, odds and ends, but I also keep in here just a stack of things that I know I can throw in the garden. This just eliminates one more kind of barrier to the executive functioning portion of this, of like trying to get things done in the garden, is giving yourself a little setup that you can just run outside really quick with, that you know has everything in it that you would be sowing around while you're gardening. In terms of how I'm going to implement this in the greenhouse, I'm planning to add a shelf above the windows behind you to add more plants, but there's a reason I left almost half of this table space open, and that's because I'm already thinking ahead to what I'm planting for the fall and winter. That's going to go in the ground not until probably July, August. But I need to be kind of thinking like, all right, we've sown all our summer stuff, we've got all the big things in, what's next? And so I'm giving myself space to have that kind of in the back of my mind. I just found this entire cup of calendula that I had like thinned and hadn't been able to convince myself to just get rid of. They're so sad though. I need to find a place to put them. I've literally stuffed calendula everywhere at this point. So far this spring has felt a lot more mindful and a lot more relaxed than last year. Last year I was still kind of finding my voice in this space and figuring out like, what did that look like? How did I want this company to evolve, and what was our mission? And now I know it's making gardening accessible for everyone, and the fact that I've been able to kind of turn this really dark time in my life with chronic pain into something beautiful has been so rewarding. But I remember last winter thinking, oh my God, the summer just totally passed me by. I didn't enjoy it at all. Like, it wasn't that it was bad, I just didn't make the time to intentionally sit back and be like, these are the days. This is the time that you've been waiting for. This is it. And so every morning now this summer, I've been trying very hard to come out here and just be like, these are the days. This is what you wanted. This is what you worked so hard for. And I think that succession sowing has kind of given me another exercise to tap into that as well, because it's like really forcing me to look at the garden as a living thing and not in stasis where it's like, all right, I planted it, it's done, move on. Like, it's always going to be continuing to evolve, and allowing it to evolve with myself and seeing the kind of circular nature of things and doing the same things that I did last year, but from a very different place and mindset mentally, is really just a great opportunity to reflect. So I think that succession planting is so much more than just a way that we maximize our harvest. It's a way that we are more intentional about the garden and keep the garden thriving all season long. So I really hope this was helpful. Please let me know in the comments if you have any suggestions for what your favorite succession plants are. I would really love to add to my list. As always, thank you so much for gardening with me, and happy growing.